But my position, when I was called by President Pak Jokowi, what is your position? But this my position is not because of I'm the minister in charge of technology of ICT, but to me, I'm a proponent of this solution. Why this provide as a quote unquote a perfect solution to empower our economic people. Why? Because if I'm the professionals, I work from 8 to 5. I have my own Avanza car or whatever it is. I'm not using it. I give my friends, Bill, why don't you use my car? But you have to return before 5 p.m. And Bill use that one. Let the people. And demo from around 13,000 taxi driver, but I'm okay with that one. Because I have a belief that it's not about technology, it's about mindset. It's about how can we change our mindset to maximize, to change, to find a new business model, to find the new business processes, utilizing or using the technology. Technology is only as a driver. Then again, so that's why I don't want to talk much on the content itself, because if it is six chapter and one chapter 1 day, it's going to take a week for us to discuss this one, unless the SSS be kind enough for us to provide this kind of forum every week. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, I have to be with Pak Darmin at 1:30, but I already sent a message to Pak Darmin. I will come late to the session. The meeting with Pak Darmin is supposed to be in the morning, but he shifted it into the afternoon because of the his meeting with Pak Jokowi this morning. So I would like to excuse later on, not more than 2 o'clock then. Coming back to the digital of Indonesia. One more thing, e-commerce, commerce, economy. Because in the words now, the definition of commerce is slightly shifted. Because in Indonesia, we don't have the clear definition of what is e-commerce. To me, I follow my professor Ibu as long of any activities, any activities that create the value add by using technology. That is the digital economy, more or less good. Please, I'm not your student, so I don't have exam for the time being. Don't judge me whether I'm passing that one. We have objective by 2030, our e-commerce, quote unquote, basically all economic activities add value, maximizing or utilizing the digital economy will reach 130 billion, or more or less will reflect it around 11% or 12% of our GDP during that period. Again, based on maths, market exchange rate. This is a leapfrog actually. You can imagine, if we projected again to 2030, what will be our digital economy 2030? Well, 2030, our economy our GDP will reach 2.4. How many billions or trillions that will be reflected on that one? That will, if we are able to do that projection, probably CSIS may take this lead to make this projection, that what kind of infrastructures, what kind of, not only infrastructure, what kind of mindset the people, not a government, not the players, not regulators, not operators, but people, ordinary people's mindset has to be changed to reach those 2030 numbers. So we have to really visioning up to 2030, not to 2050. We know the numbers from PwC on 2050, right? Will be number 4 in terms of economic GDP, but based on the PPP. But if it is based on the maths, will be ranked number 7 by 2050. So again, this depends on the leadership of the sector. I'll give another sample. Doctors, healthcare. There is a study, survey conducted that people who use the facilities of BPJS in Jakarta, they have to spend on average 4 hours 20 minutes in hospitals. the clock starts ticking when they arrive in hospital. And then they register, waiting for the doctor, to consult with the doctor, get the receipt, and then take the receipt to the pharmacy, and then get the medicine. It took 4 hours to journey from Jakarta. Not to mention between their homes to the hospital and back from the hospital to their residence. This is something that we have to address. There is a low-hanging fruit that we can address by changing the business process. So that's why there's an application, call it Hello Doc. There is 16,000 doctors registered under IDI, Indonesian Doctor Associations. Their specialists, their specialty, and then how much is their rate per minute that we can consult with the doctor. We can make an appointment with the doctor. So we are trying to avoid the traffic. We can do consultations, whether through voice or through the video call. The rate is vary from 6,000 per minute to the expensive one is 1 million baht. This is for specialists. This is for people who would like to consult with the doctor for the heart attack or something like that. You can guess who is the doctor. See, so we can save a lot of time for this one, a lot of energy, a lot of cost. After we have consultation with the doctors, one thing that with this application, doctor cannot inject our body because it has to be physically with the doctor. And if we agree on the prescription provided by the doctors, within 2 hours, guaranteed that the medicine will be delivered to our house by what? Gojek. So again, this is a lot of things, but it's all about the changes of the business processes. Not only it is because of technology, because technology, even credit card, to reach for a credit card in the world to reach 50 million customers, it took 28 years. But for Twitter to reach 2 million, 50 million users only need 2 years. This is the technology itself. But I don't want to talk on that, but the focus is not on the business processes. So that's why Paros, probably your next book, has to focus on the business process changing that will win this country. And Indonesia has to be open to these changes. Because Indonesia has to position itself to be competitive in the international space. Look at from the Google point. We still have a lot of issues, not on the good things, but probably considered as bad things on the Googles, on the text of OTT. But I have a solution already. But the issue is, you have to settle first with the tax office, the tax authority, right? For the past. But for the future, I even have with Pak Tom, I agree to do some amendment of our DNI list. It's a matter is for me, Pak Tom, Pak Darwin, report to the President. Why don't we do some amendment to ensure that all OTT is taxable in the country. So we won't dispute anymore with the BOT concept, Badan Usaha Tetap or Permanent Establishment. And these changes, this also actually quote unquote stimulate the government officers to change their mind to do some deregulations which more applicable, that addressable as well, or not that can address to the changes of these business processes and the ecosystem, and including the technology. So, by this, actually, I would like to conclude my short remarks. It's 15 minutes anyway, but so Pak Tamba was that he owed me once, because I'm standing here on his behalf. By this again, thank you very much to my senior. Ros, again, congratulations. My appreciation. I know Ros not as the book writers but as the journalists. Semuanya sekali lagi saya ucapkan terima kasih Kak Onno, semuanya Bu Natali, Bu Clara, everyone. Terima kasih banyak. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Rudiantara. Okay, don't worry, Pak. We already have the book special for you. So I would like to invite Professor Louis to join Minister Rudiantara in front of us to present the book to Minister Rudiantara.
Professor, thank you very much. Make sure this book is less than 2 million rupiah. Report to KPK.
And now I would like to invite also Mr. Hari Chansilalahi, Mr. Yusuf Wanandi, Mr. Felix Fermonte, Mr. Agus Soesastro, Ambassador Pakabisa Agustin Sifuba, and also Mr. Tamba Parulian Hutapea to receive the book from Minister Rudiantara.
Saya cuma pakai tangan saya aja. Last but not least. Kalau di mafia dan Corleone.
Thank you very much, Minister Rudiantara, for your time and inspiring speech. Now, I will start the book discussion and invite our panelists for this session. First of all, Dr. Edwin Jurriens from the University of Melbourne, Dr. Ross Tapsell from the Australian National University, Ms. Kathleen Azali from ISIS Yusuf Islam Institute, Mr. Onno Purbo from Surya University, and Dr. Grace Citra Dewi from the CSIS. The session will be moderated by Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, the head of Economics Department of the CSIS Jakarta. From all the panelists, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andy, for the introductions. Very good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. This afternoon we're going to talk about some things that in my opinion, is very close to our life these days. We're going to talk about digital technology and how it affects the livelihoods of Indonesian. here, including us. I think this digital technology, or perhaps in daily life we know it as internet. The internet is very close to us. I believe many of us start our day not by a cup of coffee, but by looking at our mobile phone, looking at our Facebook profile, perhaps, or even checking our WhatsApp message. That's what we start our day. And then throughout the day, we also would be related, would be connected to the internet, through internet, and also end our day also by checking our internet profile. So it's very close to us. But if we look at the statistic or the data on the internet and digital technology in Indonesia, actually this is a kind of a new phenomenon. If we look at 10 years ago, the internet users in Indonesia was still less than 10 million users. But nowadays, one of the estimates mentions the internet users is more than 70 million, just within 10 years. And then you can see that from statistics also during the last 5 years, the number, the figures of internet users becomes very high. And it already affects our livelihood actually. So with these facts, I think we can see that the publications of this book, Digital Indonesia, that we just launched today, is very timely. And I can tell you, this is a book that I think most of us or all of us need to read, because it's also quite interesting. There are many facts that the book also mentions in the content, and we are going to discuss about the contents of the book. And the book itself contains like 15 chapters, and these 15 chapters are sections into 5 sections. It covers about the area of connectivity, divergence, identity, knowledge, and also economy. So it's a very vast book, and it covers a wide range of area. And we are lucky that we have at least 5 authors of the book, of the chapters of the book, that cover all of those areas. And then we can have discussions. We can also listen to the summary, presentation summary about what they have written in their chapters. So I'd like to introduce just briefly introduce the panelists for today's discussions. The first one is the editor of the book, Edwin Jurriens. I hope I pronounce your name quite correct, Edwin Jurriens. He's lecturer in Indonesian Studies, Asia Institute of University of Melbourne, in Melbourne, and visiting fellow of School and Humanities and Social Science in the University of New South Wales. And then so we have also Tapsell, also the editor of the book, lecturer in Asian Studies, AAU College of Asia and Pacific. And then we have several authors of the chapters of the book. First of all, I think I don't need to introduce him any longer. Bapak Onno Purbo. I think everybody knows Pak Onno since the early days of internet in Indonesia. As an activist, as trainers, and many other things that you can relate to internet. Also, we have Kathleen, Miss Kathleen Azali. Miss Kathleen Azali is in ICS at the moment. Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, also specializing or put a lot of interest in internet, in the digital technology. Lastly, I also need to introduce my colleague actually, Dr. Grace Dewi. Grace is the researcher in the economic department in CSIS, also one of the writers in this book. All right, I don't need to. I think we only have around 1 hour 15 minutes left to discuss about the book and the contents of the book. So I'm not going to ask you to present the chapter of the book, the chapter that you've written, but rather I would like to ask you to make a summary on the things that you wrote in the book or anything that related to it. I should proceed first and ask Edwin, if I may call you Edwin, to talk a little bit about the book, about the chapters, about the coverage of the books. I mentioned about 15 chapters of the book, but if you can also sum up a little bit about the books as an editor. And I know that you also write some things about art and hacktivism. And I'm going back to you later on to ask about this hacktivism, because I'm totally I don't really understand what the hacktivism means. So later on I'm going back to you about that. But first of all, perhaps you can also talk a little bit about the book, and also the same thing about that to Ross, if you may ask later on. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for attending. So yeah, I think Ross is actually the best person to give the overview of the whole book.
Right.
But maybe I can just give some background on how this book came into being. So I really have to acknowledge Ross for first of all for inviting me to be part of this project. And I think it has its roots in our interest, our shared interest in the media in Indonesia. I think in Ross's case, he's interested in journalism, in the political economy of the media. My own background is more into cultural studies, so in my case, I do have an interest in media and art from the perspective, so different from Rudiantara's approach, I suppose, so more on the qualitative analysis of the contents of the media. And then, yeah, especially my current projects, I've got a strong interest in creativity. And that's something we can come back to later. But yeah, it was quite, I think, just, you know, about my personal experiences being involved in the project, and as several people have already mentioned before, I think it has been a very challenging one, but in the end, surprisingly smooth because of the support, especially from the ANU and bringing everything together. But of course, it's an immensely, as you mentioned as well, vast, diverse, broad issue, but an issue that has to be addressed because, I mean, challenges of the digital technology is at the core of contemporary life. So it's something that we cannot avoid, and because that's the case, we better also learn about it, study it, and yeah, it affects every possible aspect we can think of. As you mentioned, we have organized the book into 5 different sections, thematic sections. I mean, I think we avoided focusing on specific organizations or specific actors. We wanted to have a more thematic approach. The first thing that comes to mind when thinking about digital technology, I think, is the idea of connectivity. So that's why that's the first section of the book. At the same time, this comes with all sorts of challenges. connectivity means that, with the digital technology, we can transcend all sorts of barriers of space, time, and even entities. If we think about connections between human beings and nature, human beings and robotics, that's now very much intertwined. And apart from that, there's also, of course, the challenges of speed, just the tremendous speed with which developments are taking place nowadays. So, we better try and start tracking what's been going on and try to go to an analysis. So, one of the challenges, of course, is that it's not just a solution to the economy or the other aspects of life. It also comes with divergences. So that's why social divergence, especially if we think about Onno's work on the digital divide in Indonesia and elsewhere, of course, that's a major issue. So that's why we made that the second section of the book. So we immediately also identify that with connectivity, there come all sorts of challenges in terms of diversion, social divergence especially. Of course, because it's part of people's everyday life, it's also a very important aspect of identity building, the third section of our book, and we've identified 3 different areas. The first one, the chapter by John Bostill, identifies a few very influential categories that are directly connected with the digital. So in this chapter, also with research from Yogyakarta, he focuses on 3 influential identity categories in terms of volunteers, the Kawal Pemilu group in particular. Then he also has a section on how voices from Papua are being represented in the digital realm. And then there's also a section on digital rights, so digital activism, digital rights, and giving voice to people. We also have a section on how, a chapter on how Islam is being shaped and represented by digital technology. And the third part of that section is on terrorism. In some of the other chapters, we also identify issues of cybersecurity, and then we move on to Kathleen's chapter in the section on knowledge, which is about the digitalization of libraries and archives, which of course is very important in having access to knowledge and also spreading knowledge. But I think, as Kathleen identifies, and also many other authors in the book, in the end, it really is about, not so much about the technology as such, but it is about what is being done with it, in terms of policies, in terms of agency. It also, the technology hasn't emerged in a vacuum. It has emerged in longer traditions of identities, of social grouping, activity, commercial enterprise. So yeah, there's something else that I also in my own chapter, to which we can go back later, wanted to emphasize, that when it comes to social engagement in art, for instance, that didn't arrive with the digital technology, but has a much longer history. And then in the final section, we focus on commerce, which of course is in line with today's project lecture as well. So yeah, I don't know, maybe Ross, you want to add a few more things?
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. CSAS for hosting this wonderful event and packed out event. Thanks, Phillips, for organising all of this, and thanks to Rudiantara, of course, giving his main speech. I think he also commissioned our second book, Edwin, on business and digital. I think we all heard. Also, Pak Yusuf, I think he offered for you could borrow his car. So if you ever need a ministerial escort, you have one. And maybe if you're borrowing Rudiantara's car, can I borrow your car to go out to the airport? This is the sharing economy now, Pak. So That would be very, very nice. I should also acknowledge the ANU Indonesia project in Blaine Lewis. We have these conferences every year. The Indonesia Update is the best update about Indonesians, politics, society, and current affairs in the world outside of Indonesia. And we've been running this for 25 years. So this book is on a long line of an illustrious really line, and it's quite an honour for Edwin and I as young scholars to be able to publish a book on the Indonesia Update series, which is 25 years old and still strong. So thanks again to the Indonesia project. There are also some authors in the audience here who aren't up on stage, but Ibu Mari Pangestu at the front, maybe if you want to stand, I don't know, Ibu, who wrote a chapter on digital economy. Pak Yanwan Nugroho from the past, and of course a distinguished scholar himself, who wrote about e-governance under the Jokowi administration and the initiatives that e-governance is attempting there. Martin Slama, who is from Austria, who wrote about Islam and online. Martin is the first ever Austrian, I think, to ever have come to the Indonesia project to write for this book. So we are truly a cosmopolitan list of authors. There are also speakers here who are going to talk about their book, but I don't want to say anything about the book because I want you to buy the book. So I'm not going to talk about what's in the book, because if you get 5 different topics and then talk to these authors afterwards, then why would you buy the book? And I want you to buy the book because it is really an exciting opportunity to be able to, for the first time, own the Digital Indonesia book, the first ever book on Digital Indonesia. And it's great to be able to launch it here, and will be available for signings when if that doesn't sell it even more. The main message I wanted to give of the whole book, of the whole Digital Indonesia message, was that whatever topic you are interested in, whether it's cybercrime, counter-terrorism, digital art, knowledge, libraries, e-commerce, digital divide, you have to understand Indonesia. And that is something that we're trying to do with this book, to sell to people outside of the archipelago and outside of Australia. That scholars looking at the digital revolution must understand the consequences of what's happening here in Indonesia. We often hear Indonesia as the #1, Jakarta as the #1 city for Twitter. Jakarta is the capital city of Twitter, of Indonesians being the 4th largest nation on Facebook. But we also, hear stories of Indonesia being #2 in the areas around cybercrime activities. We also know that Indonesia has a really exciting digital art collective, and hacktivism is at the front of the avant-garde art series here. We know that the digital divide is huge here. 97% of Jakartans own a smartphone, and only 40% of Papuans own a mobile phone, sorry, not a smartphone, a mobile phone. So the divide, as Onno can explain more, is a really important issue for Indonesia, but it's a really important issue for the world as we think about the rising inequality around the world and the way that the internet contributes to that inequality. Indonesia is at the forefront of these debates. So this is the issue, these are the 16 different topics. So whatever you're interested in, whatever discipline you have, your background, there is a chapter there for you that I think you will say, right, this is what I must get, and this is what I want to get out of it. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. I will try to ask all speakers to keep to maybe very short times, so maybe 2-3 minutes, so that we have plenty of time for questions afterwards, because I know a lot of you probably have urgent questions that you'd like to ask. So thanks. Maybe over to Kathleen.
Yes. Well, I think we're going to have Pak Onno after this. Yeah. Because Pak Onno first, because Pak Onno, not only because you're a prominent person in the digital technology, but also like what Pak Ross already mentioned, that digital divide is still here in Indonesia, despite all the hype that we have here. So please.
Terima kasih Pak Ros. Pak Ros is my supervisor during the writing process, and he is very, very tough. Thank you, Paros. But I learned a lot during the process. Anyway, if there is no connection, forget about digital economy. So that's the point. If Indonesia wants to be leading or leapfrog, connection is very important. So in the book, I did survey because of Paros. I did survey to International Telecommunication Union, to Internet Society. Indonesian penetration of internet is about 20% only of the population. If we ask Rudiantara, if we ask the Indonesians, they said about 30% or close to 40%. Okay, so there's a gap between international community and what the Indonesian. Okay, anyway, if we want to have penetration 50%, it's very tough. Because if we check BPS, the statistics, close to 50% of Indonesians is actually live in rural areas. Pak Rudiantara mentioned he wants to lay out the submarine cables, 4G, whatever. All connection, all telecommunication infrastructure in Indonesia is run by private sector. So we have to underline that. Everything run by private sector. It means it's looking for money. If there is no money, no connection. So that's the reality. Sorry. Can you show the okay, so this is the map. You can check the map in opensignal.com, or you can download the apps in your Android, OpenSignal, and you can check the map. Okay, this is the whole Indonesia. Look at this. This is the signal, the condition of cellular signal in Indonesia. Look at the signal. Where is the signal? Java, South Sulawesi. The rest of Indonesia, forget it. So if you want to have signal, the ingredient is very simple. You have to be the president or vice president. That's it. Okay, and they are looking for money. Okay, so that's the condition. Okay, this doesn't mean the nation have no solution. The technology is actually is getting very cheap and very easy to use. That means everybody can build their own infrastructure actually. But according to the law, only private sector or legal or licensed operator can build infrastructure. So that's the condition. Okay, can you skip to the last? Oh, okay, sorry. Next slide. Okay, this is in Java. It looks like we have a lot of signal. Actually, it's not. The South Java, where there's a lot of kampung and mountain, there is less signal there. Okay, can you go down? Sorry, up. So, this is the solution from the government. Okay, they create a project, and this picture taken about what? This is on the Google. I captured last year, and this is what happened with the government project. Okay, this is about 8 million rupiah. 800 million rupiah. Okay, it's lost. Okay, going down. Okay, down. Okay, up again. Stop. Okay. This is one of the community solution. I have to tell you, this is actually illegal. This is a cellular network in Papua, illegal, without license. It has been running for 4 years now. And the guy actually who built these things, my friend also, he is a professor now. Curtis is a professor. He's now in Washington University, and he's joined Facebook. And Facebook is going to have a community cellular network initiative, because Facebook really needs users to access the internet from anywhere. Okay. Now, by the first week of August, Curtis will go to Indonesia. That's why I talked about this with Rudiantara a few minutes ago. And then by the first week of August, Curtis will go to Indonesia, Facebook will go to Indonesia and talk to us possibility to deploy this kind of network all over Indonesia. Facebook willing to invest their money to build network for rurals. Okay, I have to give you an underline or not. This is the longest running community cellular network in rural area in the world, illegally. Okay. 4 years, illegal is running, and this becoming an example for Facebook, for rural, that rural can run their own network. This network is run by school teacher, guru sekolah dasar. He's the one who run the network, and it works fine, no problem. You know how much it costs the kotak, the box? If you can build your own, the actual cellular is about 1.5 million rupiah. This one is only about 50 million rupiah. We can build our own. Okay, I will stop. So, yes.
If I may ask a little bit about this, how you can scale up into the national level, or is it possible to do that?
Sure, why not?
I mean, like this community one, because I don't think so with this kind of community.
With three like this, it's difficult to scale up in Jakarta, yes. Oh, bisa. No, just kidding.
This is interesting actually, because this is kind of like a substitute to the what the market or private sector can offer, especially in the place that not profitable for them. But can we do that at the national level? I mean, I don't think Telkomsel or other providers would be very happy with this kind of development.
From technology side, is actually they are using this thing as well.
I'm an economist by training,
so from technology, the base transceiver station BTS run by Telkomsel, Excel, whatever, is now moving to this kind of technology. So they are going to use the same technology because this is cheaper. Okay, so it will
work from the economic point of view or from the policy point of view.
The policy point of view is like this. Should I say something honest or no?
Because this is it's an academic institution.
This is dangerous. Okay. Is there an operator?
This is quite. I think this is quite important, especially when we're talking about digital divide.
This is tough. Okay, I have to be honest. This technology can be home-brewed. We can make our own technology with this. The way of thinking is very similar with sound card. You know sound card in your PC? It's basically to convert digital to sound. The inside of this thing is similar to sound card. So everybody can build this thing. I run a workshop from one campus to another, so it works. So, okay, the problem is, if everybody can build this thing, Nokia, Siemens, they lost their market. And that's happening with me. I have been, actually the minister is, we are begging to the minister, can we introduce this to the Indonesian operator? And then they said to me, okay, talk to Telkomsel. And I talked to Telkomsel. The guy actually my student. And he said to me, Onno, talk to the wall. That's it. Simple.
Okay, we got the idea. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the infrastructure thing is still, we still have a lot of problems in the infrastructures. Okay, I will move to other speaker, other authors. Please, Kathleen, if you may say something about your chapter, about anything related to that, anything important.
Okay, thank you. When I was first asked by Ross and Edwin whether would I be interested in writing in this, I asked them why approach me, who has academic training in the library information science, to write on this, and they said they want more cultural studies and historical perspective. So that gives you some idea about what's in my chapter. And to relate to Pak Onno's talk, I actually argued that libraries and archives should be seen as an infrastructure building, because for the longest time, I think in Indonesia we tend to see it as a sort of very technical background, very neutral area, whereas we know that it's not. It plays a big role in knowledge construction and historiography of Indonesia. So the chapter has very big words in the title. It's like digitalizing knowledge and efficient libraries and archives. So lots of big words. I focus on libraries and archives only because the previous Indonesia update 2012 has already done it, dedicated on education, so you're welcome. And I also feel that libraries and archives tend to be seen as a backstage thing. It doesn't figure prominently on your mind. We usually chastise this to a lot of education discipline in Indonesia, but let me ask you, can you name professor of the library information science in Indonesia? I can name, people usually can name history professor, sociology professor, even though we say the state is that, but library information science is kind of like very in the background. And it also has a great divide as well. The digitalization, with digitalizing, the assumption is that it gets very easier. It gets easier to record, to archive, and books will become obsolete. But what usually happens is that it's easy to record, easy to copy, but it's also very easy to run. Meaning, it becomes especially difficult actually to ensure that archives become interoperable across different software, across different hardwares, and preservation actually becomes even more difficult. If you write on stones, they probably last for thousands of years, but on hard disks, they last, very shortly. And also on the statistics, anyone wants to guess how many libraries in Indonesia there are? Sorry? I don't know myself. To be honest, I looked up on the statistics in the Perpustakaan Nasional. So this is, we know how divergent statistics in Indonesia tend to be, but statistics in Indonesia on libraries can be very, very highly divergent. 6 months before it's say 22,000, and then suddenly it's 60,000, and in different population they said 1 million in the same period, and from the same source, National Library. So you can imagine how difficult it is. And that's, if you think about what libraries are like in Indonesia, you can understand, because even just covered can be said to be a library. Covered in a kampung, kantor RT RW atau kecamatan can be said to be a library for procurement. And yet less than 10% of them are supported by the government. So the patterns of development and digital divide are also very prevalent as well. It's very centralized in Java, and more visibly is also the gender divide. A lot of people who work in libraries and taman bacaan and PAUD are actually women, but whereas the people in ICT are mostly male. So these are issues that we often hear in technology outside, that we need more women in ICT, but definitely, Pak Onno definitely also agree. Yeah. So, yeah, it creates complex dependency issues, and last point is just that libraries and archives are deeply integrated into the day-to-day bureaucracy and historiography, actually, of Indonesia. I think last year we remember how the Red Scare raids and everything, and the National Library made a very controversial statement that they will, destroy the books on related to leftists. So these are issues that make us realize how libraries and archives are operating in a very precarious, ill-defined legal constraints. We tend to assume that, with digital, everything can be mocked up and people can access them, but they are built on layers of history for them. So yeah, that's...
Kathleen, if I may ask you on that thing. When we're talking about digital technology, especially with the related to knowledge, we tend to look at this as the way to have free access. And that's why it is also a chance for us to duplicate the archive and knowledge. But on the other hand, when we're talking about this book on the Digital Indonesia, it has copyright, and it cannot be distributed freely in the internet. How do you think the situations will affect the digitalization of archive and library in Indonesia? Like for example, here in CSIS, we have this. We have a program actually to digitalize our publication, but we can only do that for our own publication. We cannot do that for our library, although the library actually have a quite good collection that not many Indonesians can access easily.
There is actually increasingly more organizations looking into this with Creative Commons, for example. And I talk about this a bit in my chapter about how some of the softwares built by Indonesian are actually open source. And it's probably the only software, open source software in the world that has this many multi-language support. There are a number of library management systems, open source library management systems, but they don't have that many multilingual support. So this is very exciting. Indonesians show that they can do very exciting at the forefront of digital technology. But so there's Creative Commons, open source. Pak Onno definitely are very good at this as well. But the issue is also we tend to think only about procurement, about allocation of resources, but we tend to under-resource and underestimate care. And this is the issue with the gender divide again. Procurement, putting it not just, if you just put it up online, right? You still have to maintain the servers, still have to do some outreach, blah, blah, blah. So this tends to be not even allocated in the budget. And to put it in an analog analogy, with the physical books access, for example, we know that it's very highly uneven in Indonesia. And the government recently launched this initiative of sending free books every 17th of the month. But if we read all the confessions of past, book donations are not always right for receivers. And once the books are there, if there's no consideration about how they're going to be maintained, circulated, then they're going to rot again. So yeah.
Thank you. I want to go back again to Edwin about the art and activism that you mentioned in the chapter. Please, if you can enlighten us about that.
Yes. I think it very much relates to Pak Onno's work. So in Indonesia and also elsewhere, I think there's close connections to community media activists and artists. So sometimes the same actors are involved in both fields, and that overlap we also see in Indonesia. I think the one thing that creative actors, artists can add is use of their imagination. So if it comes to representing the interest of the people, I think that's something that comes back in many of the sections in our book. Bayama also talks about the interest of by the government, for the government, and from the government. I think and Ibu Mari also talks about the importance of inclusivity in terms of the economy. Ross addresses the problem of the homogenization of media content and monopolization of ownership. I think that's where the community media activists and also the artists have a role to play. It's about making, if it comes to activism, it's about making information accessible that otherwise is not accessible, and then it also relates to some of the things Kathleen has been talking about. Then it's also about the distribution of that information and about making sure that the information is actually useful for local communities. Now, what some of the artists have done is not just produce a work of art to be displayed in a gallery or museum or to be sold at an auction house, but it's actually very much process and project-based in collaboration with local communities. So I give a few examples of art communities in Yogyakarta, House of Natural Fiber, XX Lab, which is all run by female artists. So also when it comes to the divide in terms of gender, I think art has a role to play. And Life Batch. And what's interesting in their projects is that it tries to connect science, art, and technology and social issues. So when it comes to projects with local farming communities, for instance, they are able to hack information that otherwise is not available. It's not something that can be found in the mainstream media, for instance. Share it with local communities. So in this case, for instance, there are a few projects that are concerned about waste, about the pollution of the rivers in Indonesia. And what they have tried to do is, for instance, trying to manipulate waste in the forms of hay and turn it into ethanol. This is process-based, it's community-based, but it will also result in projects that can be, objects that can be displayed in a gallery. And I think it's one thing is the imagination that artists can add. The other thing is also to give it a public presence in the form of artworks and raise awareness about the issues in that particular form.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. Since we have here Pak Yusuf Wanandi, which is not only the founder of CSIS, but also the founder and president director still for Jakarta Post. Perhaps I should also ask Ross to elaborate a little bit about internet and media, because Ross, you wrote about the digital technology and media. So Pak Yusuf perhaps also would like to hear about that.
Sure. This will be fun. Well, the chapter that I write is about the future of media in the digital era. And obviously one of the things that we do know is that the decline of print media circulation, where internet penetration rises, print media circulation declines. We know that around the world. One of the big issues really for Indonesia is when you look at the local press, the local printed press. So I'm talking Lombok Post, Radar Bali, Cendrawasih Post, these kind of things. They've generally all become part of a larger business group, either the Jawa Post Group or the Kompas Gram Media Group. And so that's seen a conglomeration of print media titles in order to survive, really. There's a kind of a self-sustaining business model that these big conglomerates use to prop up local print media. But the really damaging or concerning thing I think to come out of my research on print media is that really in the local provinces, the print media relies heavily on government advertising and advertorials. To the extent now where, now I'm talking local media, not necessarily Jakarta media, but at the local level, if government stopped advertising and putting advertorials in print media, those newspapers would collapse. And that's the future. Newspapers are declining and people are now moving online. How many people in this room, let's just do a brief survey, raise your hands if you get a print media delivered to your door every day. That's not too bad, but still only about, what, 10%. Hands up if you subscribe to an online media site. By that I mean you pay money. Not that you kind of just have your email address, but you pay money for an online media site. Probably 5%, right? Hands up if you've checked Facebook today. All right. Hands up if you checked Facebook in the last hour while we've been talking. Yeah, I know it. Don't keep your hands down. I saw you. So this is the challenge. How do media companies make money in the digital age? But Yusuf Wanandi knows it as better than anyone else. I have some strong views on the Jakarta Post. I think that it can't survive under a way of paying behind a paywall. That's just my personal opinion. No people smarter than me are involved in that organisation. But you need to be able to get advertising online, and at the moment it's very difficult. So what we've seen in the media industry is a convergence, a conglomeration of media companies, whereby companies now own TV stations, radio stations, online sites, social media sites increasingly. When we talk about Haritano investing in WeChat, the Bakri's invested in Path for a short time, and the Syariat Marches now all are investing in e-commerce. So the reality is also investing in e-commerce industries, somehow to try and make money. The idea that if you get people paying for things online, products online, or events, weddings, funerals, whatever it may be, purchasing things online, that can then fund the media organisations in the future. The consequence of which is obviously the big media is getting bigger, more wealthy media becomes more wealthy, and smaller independent media is dying out. And that's the challenge, I guess, and perhaps Yusuf would like to respond later, but I guess that's the challenge for people for organisations like Pikiran Rakyat, Jakarta Post, smaller radio stations. Do you have to be tied to a big, larger conglomerate to survive in the digital era? The trend suggests yes. So in conclusion, digitalisation hasn't necessarily made for a diverse range of viewpoints and views in the media, in the professional media space. In fact, digitalisation has led to an increasing space where politically powerful media moguls continue to exert their power.
Thank you, boss. Last but not least, I would like to ask our own Grace, or CSIS, to talk about the commerce aspect, which is also related to the theme of our policy forum today, our conference.
Yes.
Please.
Yes, so the chapter that Professor Mari and I wrote actually has a lot of findings, interesting findings, but in the spirit of supporting what the editor wants, which is not to share a lot of points to you so that you will buy the book, I will only share a very small part of findings. So first of all, based on available data that we gather, yes, digital economy has a positive impact on the Indonesian economy. For every % of increase in mobile penetration, it will add $640 million to the GDP. And in terms of impact to the labor market, it will add about 10,700 jobs. This is for increase, 1% increase in mobile penetration. And then in Indonesia, we also find that we have rapid growth of digitalization in terms of mobile penetration, internet penetration. In fact, the ICT growth itself, it's one of the fastest growing sector in the creative economy. The other thing that I want to share is that we have a lot of challenges as well. The first thing is the digital divide, which Onno Purbo already shared. And then also in terms of our own readiness. And that means our ICT infrastructure, affordability of the services itself. And then importantly, one thing that I add to the digital divide argument is that skills. It's very important for everyone or every person to have the right skill before he or she can productively use or take advantage of the ICT. Because there are a lot of activities that are not productive, but there are activities that are monetizable when you use the ICT itself. And finally, about the ecosystem, we need to foster some sort of the right ecosystem that will nurture the nascent digital economy to truly flourish, to become a big part of the GDP. Yeah.
Okay, good. Very short, very short summary of your chapter. I think you
short piece.
Yeah, teaser part. Yeah, teaser.
Yeah, only the teaser.
You're really good seller of this book. You give a teaser and you don't give your
To be honest, there are a lot of important findings there, very relevant to our everyday lives, but I will not share it.
Okay, but let me ask you about what Pak Rudiantara, the Minister of Telecommunications, already mentions there. That he mentions the examples of how the financial institution, biggest financial institution, might come up also from this digital technology, or for example, in the e-commerce roadmap. It explicitly mentioned that the digital economy will reach 130 billion US dollar. Is that correct? Yeah, 130 billion US dollar in value by 2020.
Yes.
Do you think it's quite reasonable to have that kind of expectations?
I think we can be optimists, but we also have to be responsibly optimists, knowing that to reach that that target, we also need to do our homework, like nurture the ecosystem, and then also making it easy for startups to grow, and then also making it easy for those with experience and knowledge and also ability to fund the startups. That's one thing. The other thing is also policy that are conducive, like tax incentive to the R&D intensive startups working in the digital sectors, and then also a friendly investment policy as well. So yes, it is reasonable expectation that one day we might be able to reach that value or target. But on the other hand, it has to be a responsible optimism in which we need to do our homework and create a policy that is conducive for the country as a whole to reach that, while also maintaining the need of inclusiveness. Yes.
Yes, given that all the problems that Pak Onno mentions also already.
Exactly.
Okay, the digital technology is about equal opportunity. So I don't want to dominate the conversation here. I would also like to ask you to participate. And so if all of you or some of you have some questions to ask, please do so. We still have 30 minutes left, and I think we can entertain around 3 or even more questions from the floor. Anybody want to? And also Pak Bos also. Okay, Pak Yusuf first perhaps, because Pak Yusuf, please go ahead.
Well, I am giving first my contrarian view on all this digital thing, because I don't believe in it. I don't type. I write all my pieces, full hand, still, and I definitely don't read internet because there are too many of them which are nonsense anyhow. You waste my time. That's number one. My real thing, I think the real danger is of this process of technology is that people in general will be imposed upon of others' ideas, and that they never take the time and the effort to think themselves. That is the greatest worry for the future. Another 30 years, as you mentioned, I don't know whether people still think in this world. That is my worry. And that is very basic. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe we need another revolution to bring this, pendulum that has gone and will move on back to a certain extent, maybe after a few centuries. I don't know. It could be possible. But I would think this is a very dangerous threat that people do not think for themselves. That's number one. Number two, I go back now to the press and the media and technology. Well, definitely everybody well known in the world is facing this problem that is related to the media, production and publication. And therefore, the challenge is how to find a kind of balance. And in between, the need still for print, because there is such a need for print if you are really serious about democracy. You cannot think through this 250 or 150 words. You don't even know what the hell they mean, actually. And some and many of them are not even responsible. So that means it's a mess if you only back, your ideas and your information on this 150 words or whatever.
Character. Not even words.
Character. Well, I don't even know understand the difference between character and word. But anyhow, my problem is really, if that is happening, then we have to go into, as many papers has done, into technology and into, the internet as well. We have online the e-paper and the other things that we try to produce. But again, as has been said, the income from these efforts are inadequate. So for the future, well, now I'm a Democrat now, for once. If you really think that democracy is worthwhile to struggle for, then you find ways and means, that the press, the printed press, has to survive. Otherwise, well, there are other models of governance, so we can emulate some of them. So why not? Maybe it's maybe trend. That the Western model of liberal democracy will be, at the end of their term, and a new system might arise without newspaper. Thank you.
Thank you, Yose. Very interesting questions, comments. Please, please introduce yourself.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Firdausi. I'm from Universitas Pajajaran. I'm actually not from Faculty of Economy, but more from Faculty of Law. I have several questions here. It's to open panelists so anyone can answer the question. Because when we talk about using the internet and anything related with gadget whatsoever, data collection especially, it's so much connected with privacy. So I was wondering to what extent actually the role of privacy, as in particular in Indonesia culture, has given an effect on whether we use the agent, for example, or in terms of the content, or when we post, or when we create the account, or when we use the transaction whatsoever from the consumer perspective, from the industry, or even from the government perspective, whether it is actually have an effect or not. And because we talk about privacy, it's related with data protection as well. So I think one of the panelists says about the archive, about the library, something like that. So I was wondering to what extent also the effect of the digital archive, in particular from a regulation perspective in Indonesia, and also what makes the data protection law in Indonesia, apart from the political perspective, but what makes the data protection law very difficult to be produced officially, because I think until now it's still in prolegnas, but I think it hasn't moved to I don't know what we call maybe continuity of the process. And then I also want to say about the media literacy, because we also hear about the connectivity, but yet when we use gadget, but we don't know how to use it, or whether it's become effective or not, we don't know yet. It means that media literacy, it's I think related also with the variety of the media that we can access, whether it's from the medium or also from the content, because one of the panelists says about the polarizing of the media group. So I was wondering whether actually this is done because of the regulation, or is it because of the distribution of wealth in Indonesia, where people who want to build, whether it's a media company or whether they want to establish the, for example, startup, because there is also a concern here in Indonesia that although there are many Indonesian startups, but many of them usually get the funding not from local people. So we have the concern about actually this will be like another Indonesia become a market again, rather than become a player in their hometown, in their home country. I think so far this is it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please. Please introduce yourself first. I don't know who you are.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Utama. I'm looking for one of state-owned bank. But my question is not related to my job, so I need to put my ID card back to my pocket maybe. I put interest in deliver financial solution for the low segment to the micro segment. But in delivering solution to the micro segment, we facing problem in the collection. The most possible, the most maybe we can say the most cheaper in collection money in the big micro segment into Google and the content provider. You know, content provider maybe Pak Onno fully understood the content provider for collection money. But in reality, even Google is too expensive to collection money to the micro segment, as well as the content provider. Maybe content provider we can say Rasakan to I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago we can call colong pulsa, but now it's more sophisticated and more governed. But we still understood this thing is too expensive to collection maybe 5,000 rupiah per week through Google or the content provider. Is there any idea how we can solve this problem? Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think we still can entertain one more questions, but if please, because we have all the lady over there. Yeah. No. You. Yeah. Oh. Oh, Bu Natali also. Okay, later on to Bu Natali. Yeah. But please brief.
Okay, my name is Rizky Siregar. I'm currently a student at UC Davis. This is a very interesting topic, I think, and very relevant. But I feel like living now just 1 hour from Silicon Valley, it's kind of like a contrasting feeling now that I'm coming back in Indonesia. Everything about digital is so positive. While I think in the rest of the world, it's something it's a dream progress that we see that automation and digital development as something that is, it gives less of jobs instead of making jobs. So I don't see, I've read the book a little bit, so I would like to ask you whether this new progress that is happening all over the world, is it something that's going to happen also in Indonesia, and should we see it as a overcoming challenge instead of solely a positive impact of digitalization? Another point is, I know that Grace mentioned about the skill that we need to prepare it. Is it public sector role or private sector role to increase the skill? Thank you.
Thank you. Azali, please, you can also.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question. I'm troubled by the fact on the measures that the government is taking to try and reconcile the new business models that have come up from use of technology with the traditional business models. I think the government thus far seems to be very torn and tends to be in support of the traditional models rather than new innovative models. Pak Rudiantara mentioned that he tried to support the new models, but I think he's losing the battle. In your opinions, what should the government do to try and reconcile these two very different modes of thinking?
Okay, thank you. I think I will go back to the panelists here. Despite all the opportunities and also the optimism that we have before, I think the floor also mentions quite reasonable concerns, like from Rizky. She mentions about how digital technology might threaten the job employment, and it already felt in the global economy. So maybe I will start with Grace to address the economic issues with many of the questions also related to the economic issues.
Yeah, so I will repeat a bit about the question so that everyone can follow. So the question is, we seemingly paint a positive story about the positive impact of digitalization to the economic, but one of the audience questions, which is Kiki, she asked about, is there any challenge, and then on the developing the right skill, is that the job of public sector or of the private sector? So I'm going to answer the first question. So in the book, we actually mentioned both the positive impact, the challenges, and then the possible negative impact. So I will share some of the negative impact. Currently, the biggest scare of digitalization or the fourth industrial revolution is that the hollowing of middle class, meaning that the middle class will be wiped out. Middle-sized firms will be wiped out. And that's because we are competing in the new paradigm, new playground. If you think about oil, in the past, it's simply about if you master a lot of oil wells, then you become big like BP, and that's it. You are the monopoly, and the government can just break you down into smaller parts as a part of to protect the customer. But if you think about digital economy, the commodity is not the same as oil, it's data. And the source of the strength of monopoly is really the network effect, meaning how many people are using it. And then data is inherently different from oil. It's now the commodity, but it's different from oil in the sense that it can be replicated limitlessly. It can go anywhere. You cannot stop it. So it's a different playground. That also means you need to be ready that there is a probability that the winner repeats all. And you cannot break it down. Like Google, everyone probably use Google now. You cannot I mean, breaking Google down into like 10 Googlets is not going to solve the problem. It will make it worse. So that's part of the possible negative impact that now we know, and therefore we need to start thinking about the policy solution from both public sector and private sector itself. And then to answer the question about skill development, who is responsible for that? Well, based on a lot of studies, empirical studies from other countries who are experiencing industrial revolution in different stages, second stage, third stage, and then now fourth industrial revolution, we see a consistent repeated pattern that says if the approach is simply from public sector, it would not be successful. If it is simply coming from the private sector, which means like bottom up, it is not going to be successful. The best combination has to be both bottom up and also top down. The government has to create the policy, but on the other side, it has to still giving the proper incentive for the private sector to also take part and in terms of skill, developing the skill itself. Meaning here in Indonesia, it's like giving chance for private sector owned incubators, venture capitals, and also giving them the right tax incentive for them to take risk in doing the venture. Yeah, I think that's my answer. Maybe other can.
Perhaps I don't know. You might respond to some of the questions.
Terima kasih banyak. The basic hearing the questions, I think the basic thing is education. If we can insert our concerns, all of you concerned in the Indonesian education, that's the ideal situation. Unfortunately, since 2013, ICT is removed from the Indonesian curriculum. So no more ICT in Indonesian curriculum. So the Indonesian student is, so we are less educated in terms of ICT. So that's our major problem. If we can reinsert this thing into the Indonesian curriculum, we may solve some of our problem. Okay, so that's the first thing. So education, empowerment, and everything. That may solve the like the privacy problem, media literacy, and some of those problems. To be honest, the Indonesian, I'm a little bit involved in this, so I feel bad. The Indonesian minister, Pak Rudiantara, his minister is trying to filtering the pornography and everything. That's actually interfering of our privacy, if you understand that. Okay, so during this filtering process, they actually have to menyadar what we are doing. So that's okay. Anyway, okay. So that's one problem: literacy, education. The second solution is actually regulation policy. This takes is a technology policy. Oh, sorry. I wrote those things in the chapter as well.
Okay.
So buy the book.
Kathleen.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, okay, I'll continue the buzz. Well, not really. The question about, yes, there is a lot of buzz, over-optimism about, arguably over-optimism about, and quite woolly data about the state of internet in Indonesia. I mean, sometimes you see market research claiming that there are up to 50% of internet penetration, and this is actually quite discussed in the book on how there is quite high discrepancy between the internet penetration between about 22% to say up to 30%. Apparently up to 8% of Indonesian people, when they are asked or they're surveyed, they say, I'm not on internet, but I'm on Facebook. So this is one very pertinent issue. It's not only exclusively in Indonesia. I mean, you can find it in many other countries. that people cannot tell the difference between internet and Facebook. But that also said about access. So what and skill and how used people are to using this new technology. Pak Onno already raised about the removal of ICT education in 2013, but another issue with education, and this might be seemingly rather not directly related to digital, but in previous Indonesia update, but the education in Indonesia up to secondary education, I think there's not a lot of private investment, but tertiary higher education institutions are mostly driven by private sectors, and they do a lot of this because they are very attuned to market demand or market sentiment. There's a lot that is being driven into technopreneur campus or promoting digital startup. But again, just go to the basic questions. How many apps are you willing to install on your phones anyway, and why are you using so a lot of app development? So these are some of the questions that, going back to the question of the lady back then, yes, there is a lot of buzz of optimism, but if you just sit for a few minutes with a number of people in the startup scene, for example,
goes more into mental and social spaces, which will have.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions. They really, at the heart of the matter, ask what is the future of democracy? What is the future of work? What two great questions two issues that we should be thinking about that this book at least attempts to address. Let me throw out two, controversial arguments, and if they're controversial, blame Onno. He's a bad influence on me. He's always throwing out bad, controversial points. But the future of democracy, I think to survive, Indonesian democracy needs a strong public service media for the digital era. Hands up if you watch TVRE. 3 people, great. Yeah, that's about right. 1.4% of people watch TVRE. It's dying. RRE is still important in the rural areas, as Onno knows, but it's drastically underfunded. And Antara is struggling for relevance in an era in which Detik.com and Kompas.com and others exist. I think Indonesia is ready to have a strong funded public service media where it can be a voice of the people and a voice of the fourth estate that the BBC or the NHK or the ABC is in other countries. And the Indonesian government needs to invest strongly in that. And perhaps even more controversially, perhaps it should put money into Tempo, because Tempo has a long and illustrious history of quality fourth estate journalism. And the Tempo TV has failed, Koran Tempo has failed, Tempo Interactive has failed, Tempo.co has failed, financially I mean. And so the future of Majalah Tempo is at stake here. Perhaps the Indonesian government needs to think, right, I'm going to invest in Tempo. That's pretty controversial because Tempo has always seen itself as being not part of the government. But maybe Indonesia is ready to have a government-funded but critical of the government media. Finally then, on the history of work, I think you're right, Igor and Natalie, about the government's response. I suppose to me, as an outsider, it seems to me that what they want to do is bring the old technologies and the new technologies to the table, and then as long as come up with a compromise, and then as long as everybody is happy, we both have a compromise. So Gojek, you invest with Bluebird, Grab and Uber, you invest with Express. I'm not sure if I got the details right there, but you get the idea. And as long as everybody leaves happy, it seems to me an inherently Indonesian way of solving the problem, come to a compromise. And I'm not sure whether in the future of work era, these necessarily always needs to be the case. And I think I'm not necessarily right on all these issues, but at least the book tries to get us thinking about these questions. How should we think about the merge or the convergence of old and new media, and old businesses and new businesses? Is it such a bad thing if suddenly the banks, the rich conglomerate banks, are suddenly under threat? maybe it's not. Or yes, maybe it is, because these new low pay and WeChat and these new sites are just going to be working in the same big conglomerate industry as the way that the banks did. But at least we're thinking about it. So that's what we hope the book would do, to get you thinking about how to answer these questions, and hopefully it's the start of many solutions to these problems that will come afterwards.
Thank you for the response and also for the controversial ideas that you throw to us. I think we don't have more time to discuss. I know that there are many questions perhaps that is still lingering around. But hopefully, if you buy the book and read the book, you can find some of the answers from the book. I'm not one of the writers of the book, but I already read the book, and then I suggest that you also do the same thing. I will invite you to give a big applause to our speaker. With that, I will have the discussions today. Go back to the MC. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you for all the panelists for a very stimulating session. So we're moving forward for the second session. We will have Professor Peter Drysdale from the Australian National University to deliver Hadi Soesastro Lecture on why Indonesia must show the way on trade strategy. Also joining with us, our very own Professor Mariel Pangestu as a discussant. Professor Drysdale and Professor Pangestu, please.
I'm honored to be the moderator of the Hadi Soesastro Lecture 2017. And as we all know, this lecture is in honor of the memory of our dear friend and colleague, Hadi Soesastro, who is, I know most of you will know who he is, but I see a lot of young faces here, so maybe some of you may not know who Hadi Soesastro is. He is one of the co-founders of CSIS. He was one of Indonesia's most prominent economists and strategic thinkers of the day. And his areas of interest were very wide-ranging, but actually today we address two of his most favorite topics, which is technology and trade. And in a moment we're going to hear a lot about trade. And you will find Hadi Soesastro's footprints, I would say, in a lot of the regional architecture that we see today, whether you talk about ASEAN, East Asia, or APAC. And in particular on technology and trade, I actually recall editing a PAFTAT volume, of which Peter Drysdale is one of the, I guess, gurus and pioneers of PAFTAT. We edited, it's a long time ago, it's 30 years ago that we edited this volume, myself and Hadi Soesastro, on technology and trade. So I think it's really appropriate today that we are going to be addressing two of the very important topics on technology and trade. And it is really a tribute to what all that Hadi Soesastro, our friend, has achieved. Apart from being a brilliant person, I think many of us who know him well also remember him as a very wonderful human being. And today we are going to be addressing a very important topic about the future of trade in a way. Peter Drysdale has titled his topic, Why Indonesia Needs to Show the Way on Trade Strategy. And in a way, we are asking this question at a very important time. As we all know, we have been talking about this so-called new normal. Part of the new normal is this disruptive technology, which we have been talking about in the previous session. And the second part of the new normal is this notion of the rising protectionism, anti-globalization, and the lack of leadership in ensuring what has been, I guess, the driver of what has made Asia for the last 3 decades grow so high, which is the open trading system. And that's under threat now with the lack of leadership in ensuring an open and fair multilateral and regional trading system. These would be all topics that I think Hadi would have really enjoyed having a good debate, and I think he would have perhaps been able to help us through thinking about it. But of course, we have today Peter Drysdale, who I could not think really of a better person than Peter Drysdale to address some of the very crucial issues that we are facing today, especially in the area of trade. Let me just introduce Peter Drysdale. Many of you also know him well. He hails from New England, if I'm not mistaken, and he used to tell me that Sir John Crawford found him in the bush and brought him to Canberra, where he completed his PhD at the Australian National University under the supervision of Max Corden. But of course, Sir John Crawford played an important role in the way he has developed and become really similarly to Hadi Soesastro. You can find his footprints in a lot of the regional architecture and the vision for APAC and so on that we see. Is currently the Emeritus Professor of Economics and the head of the East Asian Bureau of Economic Research and East Asia Forum at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University. But he is also a recipient of many awards, including the Japanese Order of the Rising Sun, the Australian Centenary Medal, and he's also a member of the Order of Australia. And his main areas of interest, as you can guess from the description that I've already given, is international trade and economic policy and diplomacy, Japan, East Asia, China, and really Australia's economic relations with Asia and the Pacific region. And he's the author of many books and papers, and he has been, I think, member or chair of many task forces and white papers that talk about the relationship of Australia with East Asia as well as many regional task forces. And his work has had a considerable policy influence in Australia, East Asia, and the Pacific. And his path-breaking study, The Economics of International Pluralism, Economic Policy in East Asia and the Pacific, really laid the intellectual foundations for the establishment of what we know as APEC today. And the last thing I would mention about Peter, which is not in this formal bio, is that Professor Peter Drysdale in ANU, prior to his current position, he was head of the Australia-Japan Research Project, as well as a professor at the Faculty of Economics. And he was very famous for one thing. He would supervise up to 20 or 30 students a year, whether they were masters or PhD students. He's very famous for that. And you can imagine through several decades of teaching how many students of Peter Drysdale there are around the world and around the region. And I'm one of them. I would say his disciples are everywhere, and we all have the same open view of the world. So without further delay, I would like to invite Peter Drysdale to the podium to deliver the 2017 Hadi Soesastro Lecture.
Thank you very much, Hadi, for those very warm words of introduction and for your welcome added those from CSIS who staff to this forum. It's a wonderful thing for me to be able to join this forum this afternoon and share some thoughts with you about developments in international economic policy that are of particular relevance to where Indonesia is at today. In sharing those thoughts, observe how this title of mine is indeed a courageous title, Why Indonesia Needs to Show the Way on Trade Strategy. It's a title that only an Australian could dream up. Pretending to come here to Jakarta and join you at CSIS with Yusuf and Hadi's family, August, and all my friends who worked together over so many years on these issues, supervising and assessing these remarks. But as Hadi was wont to say to me, I was never noted for my diplomacy. So I venture to ask you to bear with me a moment whilst I try over the next 30 minutes or so to persuade you that indeed this is an important juncture at which Indonesia has a particularly important role to play in international economic policy. And I shall try to persuade you of that in the course of my remarks. Let me just say a few words first about Hadi. Hadi's policy link, as Mari pointed out, is immense. There were no major developments in economic cooperation or initiatives that were taken in economic cooperation in our region during his professional lifetime that didn't have his light but powerful touch upon them. He was a key player in all the major developments in ASEAN, in the broader region, in the Asia-Pacific endeavour, and in relations between Australia and Indonesia throughout his professional career. He made an important and powerful contribution to the beginnings of thinking about the idea of the Asia-Pacific economy. And in his brilliant and quietly persuasive way, he defined what the ASEAN way was all about and why it was so important to being effective in the development of economic and political communities in our part of the world. He was the architect in some fundamental ways, together with others, Mari and others here in Indonesia, of the ASEAN economic community idea and laying out the foundations upon which that institutional development could be put in place. He provided intellectual navigation through the very difficult days of the Asian financial crisis, not only for Indonesia, but for other economies affected by it in the mid-1990s. And he played a critical role in the articulation of the idea of East Asian cooperation, which grew out of that crisis period and now is so important to the mobilization of economic policy efforts in this region. But most importantly of all, and Mari and I know this very well, he was a person who mentored and nurtured the next generation, and we still benefit from that legacy, not only here in Indonesia, but around the region. I, of course, owe him a great personal debt myself. All that I learned about the Asian economy, about Indonesia and its role in the Asian economy, about ASEAN, were at his knees. He is indeed the inspiration of the brave thoughts that I'm going to put forward to you this afternoon. This is a very difficult time in the history of economic policy making, international economic policy making. I'd venture to say that this is the most difficult time in international economic policy making, and there have been some very difficult times in my lifetime that I have contemplated in my 50 plus years of professional work. There are huge uncertainties in not only the international economy but in the international polity in consequence of developments mainly located in the industrial economies and industrial societies. These are importantly focused around the slow recovery from the global financial crisis. And I think we've all underestimated the extent to which that crisis has corroded many important institutional frameworks in the big economies of the world, but also in the global system. Through the malaise that the global economy has faced, despite the relative early success of recovery over the last decade or so. We know that trade growth is stagnant. We know that having grown twice as fast as GDP growth, which indeed was growing twice as fast as it is today, that trade growth is now barely matching GDP growth. Last quarter it looked a bit better than it has for some time. Merchandise trade in particular has lagged. And those services trade is a little bit more bullish. Overall, the outlook of the international economy is very gloomy. There are many reasons for this. A few important reasons, of course, have to do with the drag that has come on policy in response to the crisis, where various forms of surrogate protectionism have impacted upon the growth of international trade flows. In the United States alone, we see significant declines in the openness of market, even before the election of President Trump and what he threatens through his policy pronouncements to do to the stability of the international trade policy environment. Brexit in Europe and the move towards inward-lookingness in Europe has added to these words. American uncertainties about policy development are already having their bite upon the environment in which businesses have to make decisions about investment and trade every day. Those things already have their impact on the potential of trade and economic growth globally. The focus, of course, on Asia is strong in this circumstance, because Asia, though it has its own difficulties, and I'll come back to those in a moment, still does relatively well compared with the rest of the international economy, growing essentially twice as fast as the world economy as a whole is growing, and with a relatively robust trade growth alongside that. And as the crisis has unfolded over the years, people have looked to Asia from other parts of the world, both in envy and in anger about why it is that Asia is doing so well when uncertainties prevail in the major industrial economies. This was a circumstance, of course, which saw these rather unexpected political developments in North America with the election of the Trump presidency. and the changes that have taken place, including Britain's exit from the common market, the European Union, in Europe. These circumstances pose important threats, but they're not only a product of those political changes that have taken place in recent times. They're deeply embedded in structural changes that have been taking place in the global economy, especially in industrial countries for some time. In North America, for example, they obviously have to do with the opportunity that the Trump campaign found for mobilizing community anguish about the inequalities in American society, these inequalities, which are in all economies and all societies, but particularly acute in some parts of the American society and economy, are a product of shocks from the international economy, shocks from technology and technological change at the time we were talking about with digitalization and other technological developments in the last several years. But they're also a product of particular mixes of policy that don't address the key question of effecting an equitable distribution from the gains from trade that we see industrial economies as well as economies in our part of the world enjoying from more openness to international trade and investment. It seems passing strange that Americans can believe that somehow the rest of the world has done them damage through openness to international trade, because we see day by day in North America how international trade delivers cheaper and cheaper goods to households and consumers and lifts welfare across society, but it certainly doesn't do that as equitably as it might. And how industrial societies are to address these challenges, of course, will require much more than a quick fix, because these things are built in policy structures and institutions that will take many presidencies beyond the Trump presidency, for example, in the United States, to unravel and change. They have to do with health policy, as Mr. Trump has discovered. They have to do with educational policy and the way in which that delivers an equitable distribution of gains from international trade. We're doing some extensive studies in Australia at the moment on what the consequences would be of various scenarios of trade policy, protectionism, warfare, if you like, if some of these options that have been canvassed be taken up. One of the clear things that comes through these studies is that, of course, the country that would be most significantly damaged in aggregate most is the United States itself, where, you know, the implementation of protectionist policies across the board and retaliation by other countries to those policies would lead to North Americans losing 5 months of their annual growth every year, so long as those measures were in place. So these aren't trivial numbers. The reality is that trade matters for the good. There might be other things that have to be done to ensure that the gains from it are equitably distributed, but those are the challenges that should be confronted, not a retreat to inward looking. So what are the threats? The threats, of course, are particularly focused upon Asia, as I mentioned, as the most dynamic part of the economy in the world. Still, Asia is at one and the same time the envy and the hope of the rest of the world. Economic dynamism depends on the impact of major reform programs that have been taking place, that have been implemented in Asia, and that are out there on the drawing boards in all the major Asian economies that you can think of, from Korea, Japan, through China, here in Southeast Asia and of course in South Asia, in India. These policies are much more difficult to undertake, as you would understand, in a hostile external economic environment than they are to undertake in an environment in which the rest of the world is growing strongly, in which policies are open and benign to fuller and deeper engagement in the international economy. I will come back to that point when I move to my conclusion later on. And at this point in time, there's no more important thing that we do than have confidence in the global system. The other point that our studies emphasize of developments and conditions in the global economy today is that if you do the numbers carefully, what you find is that even if the rest of the world went to protectionism, if Trump implemented some of the protectionist policies he promises, even half of them, and if Europe went more inward looking, the best policy strategy for Indonesia or for Australia or for Japan or for Malaysia is to continue to prosecute openness and the freeing up of their economies, because those things would ensure more against the damage from inward lookingness than going the other way, joining the throng towards increased protectionism. These are important, simple but important observations about how we should respond to current circumstances. So we face a world in which there are growing uncertainties and risks. A world in which already the threat of policy, if not the implementation of policies that change direction on the whole 70 years of liberalisation that we've had in the global economy since the Second World War, are bound in themselves to reduce economic potential and human welfare. These uncertainties about economic cooperation and the risks of trade, wars and protectionist actions are nowhere to be taken more seriously than in our part of the world, because our part of the world is the one that continues to benefit and drive strong growth based on integration in the global economy, and is a living embodiment of the benefits from that. And perhaps in question and answers we can come back to talking about some of the internal threats to that in our region. But let me leave that proposition sitting out there for the moment. So my story then is about who can help in this. And the strange thing for many of you might be that I come back to say, well, of all the countries in the world that you might think can help most at this point, Indonesia is the country that can most help. Not Indonesia alone, as I'll explain in a moment, but Indonesia critically and importantly because of where it sits in the world, how it's linked to the world, and all the legacy that has come from the policy philosophy and policy strategy that has been built in this country and its partners and neighbours in our part of the world over the last 20 or 30 years. The legacy about which this forum is to do. So, why can ASEAN help? ASEAN, many people think, is dogged by weaknesses and vulnerabilities that makes it impossible to be an effective player in the international economy, international economic policy space. It's not the institution or the region in the world that the world might naturally turn to in the face of threats like we have in international economic policy currently. There are questions about the weakness of its institutional arrangements, institutionalization. And there are political and security distractions, in particular at the moment in the South China Sea, to do with the differences in political relations between various members of ASEAN and China in particular, and various approaches that members of ASEAN have taken to the American response to that through the pivot to Asia, including through the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership arrangement that the United States under Obama instigated. But despite these doubts, ASEAN remains a successful example of economic community building built on open regionalism, a concept which Hadi and others here grappled with for many years as we moved to establish the economic cooperation institutions of Asia and the Pacific. Avoiding the fundamental mistakes of supranational intervention of a kind that was unsustainable in the European experiment. So whilst people might worry about various forms of economic community arrangement in the world if they're modelled upon Europe, there's one thing we can say with certainty, and that is that ASEAN is not bedeviled by such difficulties and weaknesses, because it's structured philosophically and institutionally in a way that's totally different from that presumes the development of cooperation through independently motivated policy developments in a spirit that requires collaborative cooperation and the evolution of institutional arrangements, not the imposition of such arrangements supranationally. So ASEAN, despite all its strengths and its vulnerabilities, appears in this context as an institution for the times. And of course, Indonesia sits at the heart of ASEAN. What are the challenges to ASEAN's interests? It's helpful to remind us of the ASEAN narrative, and I'll do this very quickly. ASEAN's narrative, ASEAN's narrative is a narrative of outward-looking growth built in a prosperous global economy from the 1970s on, when Indonesia committed to its early reforms and replicated them decade after decade. It is a narrative that is based on openness built upon domestic reform that was motivated importantly by the need to improve the competitiveness of domestic industry as deregulation and liberalisation took place. And that remains the way in which the ASEAN policy effort is structured today, dismantling institutional regulatory barriers and protectionist barriers to trade and building stronger industrial competitiveness and economic competitiveness upon that openness. This was the era in its early phase of so-called export-oriented growth. I first came to Indonesia, this city, in 1969 as a member of a group commissioned by the ASEAN economic ministers to undertake a study of Southeast Asia's economy in the 1970s. And in that report to economic ministers in ASEAN, I and my colleagues promulgated the idea of export-oriented development for the ASEAN, the newly formed ASEAN group of economies. And that strategy has dominated the strategy of economic and trade development in Indonesia since. These narratives are important today because they underline the context in which ASEAN centrality can be useful in addressing the challenge of the threat to global institutions today. ASEAN is party to a negotiation of regional barriers to trade and commerce under the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Arrangement. Some ASEAN members have also been party to the Trump-aborted Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. That was a cause of tension within ASEAN because each strategy presumed different paths towards liberalisation. One, the RCEP process, a much more ASEAN-centred path, and indeed instigated by Hadi, Mari and their colleagues here in Indonesia, importantly. The other, a path directed by the imperatives of a strategy that engaged the United States confidently in the Asian economy, but only part of the Asian economy because many players, important players, including Indonesia and China, were excluded from it. But TPP would have been a significant advance on the liberalisation of trade, importantly between Japan and the United States, for example, and this thus benefited significantly the region as a whole. That's on hold. It's less of a distraction now in proceeding forward with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Arrangement. This is not just an economic policy. It's not merely technical economic policy choices that we are confronted with here. It's also a political cooperation endeavour. Because RCEP, as distinct from TPP, involves a free trade element, a free trade agreement element, but it also involves an ongoing commitment to economic cooperation endeavours, which will see institutional take place and evolve over a long period of time. And in fact, an infinitely long period of time. And if it succeeds over the next couple of years in being put in place, it will commit its participants to that engagement over a long period of time. A commitment that inevitably has important political consequences, meaning that the participants to the process, including China, and Japan, and India, and Indonesia and Southeast Asia, as well as Australia and New Zealand, will have a mechanism in the normal course of doing economic cooperation, business year by year, day by day, for political cooperation. A mechanism which will alleviate some of the more difficult challenges, potentially, certainly high policy strategists in China and Japan willingly acknowledge that the region faces in the political security theatres today. So this is a particularly important time, and to shorten my narrative, let me just emphasise briefly how important it is not only to the promotion of the economic potential of our region, but also the protection of the global economic regime, particularly the trade regime, that Indonesia within ASEAN plays a key role in this process. The RCEP endeavour, for example, has as its main important objective providing a framework within which the partners can mutually reinforce each other's economic reform agendas. All of them, coming from different stages of development, have a substantial interest in economic reform at this stage because they collectively face the next important transition in their economic development ambition. Commonly, that's summarized or telegraphed for many of these economies in our region as transitioning through the middle income phase of economic development that has bedeviled many economies trying to move from lower income levels, middle income levels to high income levels in the past. A process which involves a whole lot of reforms importantly focused on the domestic economy that have to be put in place importantly at home rather than abroad, but will be more readily put in place if they're accompanied by complementary reforms in strongly interdependent neighbouring countries, such as we have in East Asia. These issues, of course, are matters for domestic policy authorities and regulators to manage. But they'll do that much better if they do it in the confidence that they're doing it in partnership with their neighbours and those with whom they're intensely involved economically as the countries of this region all are. So, let me conclude by making a few remarks about where ASEAN and Indonesia stands to gain in this process now. The wave of regional development in Indonesia, in ASEAN, in East Asia, importantly has been one that has been premised upon open regionalism. That means it's premised upon an open global international system. If you think about the structure of ASEAN, when at its foundation only, as I recollect, 9.7% of all ASEAN trade was intra-regional trade. The other 90% was trade with other countries outside the immediate region or with the rest of the world. And still today, that remains the case. So the central interest for the ASEAN group of countries is in a strong and open global system. When that system closes off, economic potential and opportunities shrink. The motivating force of this region then is one that puts reliance and puts effort into keeping the global regime open. Avoiding the European problem in the way in which it institutionalizes economic cooperation by undertaking that cooperation by mutual agreement and collaboration rather than by supranational mechanisms that are bound to have political reaction and forces deregulation and reform in the domestic economy by relating that deregulation and reform to opportunities in the relevant regional economy, in the broader Asia Pacific, and in the globe, and the mechanism around the globe, and the mechanisms for doing that, institutions for doing that are in place now. So if you look around the world and you try to think of one place in the world in which there is an extant negotiation that would buttress openness in the global economy, you can think of but one. And that mechanism is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership arrangement in the ASEAN, among the ASEAN plus 6 countries. So why do I say this is a particularly important time for Indonesia to see the strategic, economic and political importance of this initiative in the context of uncertainties in the global economy is because all eyes are focused on this region in stepping up to this plate. And there's never been a more opportune time for quietly doing what's out there and being done potentially now for us to get on and do it together in partnership. The courageousness of these remarks to this audience in Jakarta, of course, has to do with the nervousness I would have in standing up to an Australian audience and telling Australian policy makers and interested policy thinkers that they have a similar responsibility, because this is not a task that can be assumed by one country. If Indonesia plays a positive and proactive role, it will be in the context of doing that with its ASEAN partners. And then beyond its ASEAN partners, it will be in the context of doing it with China, with Japan, with Korea, and with India, because all of them will have to be brought to the party. But there's a mechanism, there's a framework for doing that now, and there's an opportunity to get on with it. So if we look ahead, Indonesia and its strategic response might seem an unlikely instrument whereby to address these big challenges that the global economy faces today. But I hope in this last 30 minutes or so I've begun to persuade you that it's not such an unreasonable proposition, and it's one certainly that collectively in our part of the world we should be thinking actively about how to bring into being. That RCEP as an impetus to economic reform will do its own work in its own way is one part of the proposition. But that activity and success on that front will also serve to demonstrate to the rest of the world that Asia is delivering a good that even President Trump might admire in terms of opening up its markets to a world when it continues to benefit more than most from open economic policies, is the second part of that proposition that is worthy of consideration. And that those efforts will help to push back protectionism and act as an agent for political settlement in our region is a set of corroborative propositions that are also worth consideration. I said before that the cooperation dimension of this endeavour is critical to its success, but also has collateral political benefit, because it in itself helps to cement a framework for cooperation which will make it easier to address some of the political difficulties that confront relations between the nations of our region at the same time.
Thank you very much, Peter, for a tour de force of looking back as well as back to the future. I think he's outlined the challenges very well and made a brave call, I think, as he put it, for ASEAN and especially Indonesia to take the leadership. And the argument is really very clear that Indonesia has, for the last few decades, been able to grow because of openness. And if that is being threatened, how can Indonesia grow further? It has to be contributing to this openness. Otherwise, it will also be not able to grow. That's kind of, in a very short summary, I think, the way of thinking. And it's not just Indonesia, of course, but Indonesia within ASEAN and within RCEP, which will be a much wider regionalism. And the kind of regionalism that we have been, I guess, disciples of for many decades is that one of open regionalism. And that is very different, actually, from what we call the North American version of free trade agreements. So I will not try to summarize too much, but try to open it now for discussion, question and answer. And we have about half an hour to do this. So, I see a hand over there. Pons, would you please, there's a mic right there. You can kick off the discussions.
Citra, Ria. Whether there are people like Mari who are very focused in the government, but I'm not sure whether your presentation will convince the Indonesian public. It seems, my reading is that the Indonesian policymakers are constrained by the Indonesian public. That's that it's so convinced of being very open. So how can you deal with that? I wonder whether, instead of presenting it this way, you present the fact that China is reforming tremendously, India is reforming tremendously, but both of them are not of open regionalism contacts because they're huge countries. They can control their borders. And if Indonesia and the rest of ASEAN will not also reform, it will lose out. So I wonder whether, like what happened in December 1989, when Indonesia and the rest of ASEAN realized that there could be a fortress Europe, there could be a fortress NAFTA, it's time to step up and move on to NAFTA. But now, with a really surging in India, as well as China, you cannot just go to your reform. Otherwise, you'll fail. Wouldn't it be a better way of selling it to the Indonesians and the rest of ASEAN, Filipinos? Because Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand are the real problems in ASEAN.
Thank you. Let's collect 3 questions and then Peter respond. And we can have another 3 if we have time. Anybody else would like to ask a question? Yose?
Thank you. Peter, you as always, a tour de force, as Mary has said, and you was one of us in the region pursuing this effort for the last 30 years. I think it's worthwhile to listen to. But the question of the day is, how do we sell this? Because it's a great idea, and I do think maybe the only idea that is still could be pursued for the time being, because the lacuna that is going to happen with the Trump administration policies will be huge. And definitely this is only our answer to this actually challenge. It's only a very small part yet, but very important part, because there's nobody else that started with the base that we have had, the experiences, and to a certain extent actually, to be able to convince public opinion as well. So I'm not as pessimistic as my Filipino colleague there, because I've been in this business also for 40 years. So therefore, the problem now is ASEAN and Indonesia's leadership in ASEAN. And first, of course, we have to convince the government here that this is a critical issue for them and for us together, and that they should take the lead in leading ASEAN for ourselves. because ASEAN actually started with ASEAN. And we have to, qualitatively, we have to improve it. And in the meantime, I thought, now that TPP is off, off the record. But I think at the same time, public opinion definitely will be a very important part in presenting this, and not too long. So that's why I would like to pursue to Peter. If you can write an article for the Jakarta Post, 700, 800 words, not characters, whatever. then I think we will start this process. And then of course Mary has to contribute too. So we are now going to the Philippines in Manila on the 8th, on the 3rd and 4th of as you know, maybe, of August, to celebrate together with our Filipino friends under Purbo, on this issue of the 50th anniversary. But then what next? So this is definitely one thing that we can take up. And I propose, maybe I change the agenda a little bit and give Mary the chance to explain this to them. How about that? Thank you.
So we've been given homework to make people think. Okay, can I invite anybody else? Okay, Alex.
I think that those two questions, because they come together rather nicely, and they do confront the key issue. How do you sell this package beyond a group of policy thinkers who are persuaded that it's the right way to go, strategically right? I think this requires all our efforts, but there are efforts that would be productively made at this time. There are two aspects of it I think that are important. One is why it's important for Indonesia and the regional economies now to undertake this effort, to continue to undertake this effort. What the payoff from is domestically. The other is organised around what the threat they face is if they don't undertake this effort. And I think both elements are important in the political sale of this strategy to not only your society and polity, but ours and all the societies and polity that have to be engaged if we're to have successful delivery on it. So there is a crisis. And creating a sense of crisis is pretty important to getting action. I'm reminded of the aphorism in Indonesia that good times deliver bad policies and bad times deliver good policies. This is an aphorism that's applicable to Australia as well. And we're entering bad times. Superficially, they might look all right for the moment, but there is an unfolding and major crisis out there. In the United States, we haven't seen the beginning of it. The Xi-Trump meeting alleviated anxieties across the Pacific, even at the top leadership levels in China. But were they right? There is no way in which they're 100% right. There are still huge uncertainties and unpredictability about how that relationship on the economic front and political front is going to play out over the next several months, particularly through next year as America faces its congressional elections. Right now, President Trump has appealed to the Security Power 232 to instigate comprehensive action on the steel trade. There's no China steel trade in the United States that worthwhile mentioning now, because there are 262% tariffs on China's steel trade that have been steadily put in place over the last decade. Trump didn't do that, his predecessor did that. But that's where we stand now. What's he going to do? Have comprehensive quota-type measures against steel imports from his allies like Germany, Japan, Korea, Canada, even Australia. This is a major shock to the international trade system. This will be a major shock to the international trade. This is not action that is out of it's action underway. So there's a problem. There's a learning crisis. So I think we have to be clear about what the circumstances in the world are that demand action collectively among a group of partners, like-minded partners, who have serious interest in the health and sustenance of the global trading regime upon which their prosperity has been built. At the domestic level, of course, I mentioned the cooperation dimension of the RCEP arrangement, and that's a very important dimension. It relates not only to the liberalisation agenda, which is an important part, but not the most important part of the RCEP arrangement. The cooperation agenda includes getting a framework within which you can make relationships with the bigger countries, including China and Japan and even India, who are going to play into this space, whether we all like it or not, through their bilateral capital power. So getting a framework within which investment in investment cooperation and trade cooperation can be managed more effectively is in the national interest and an important potential impetus for growth and well-being. It's true that China's big and India's big, or potentially big, not so big now, but potentially big. China's going to contribute much more than any other economy to world growth, even under the most pessimistic growth scenarios over the next decade or so, than any other country. These economies have people have a natural anxiety about these economies and the scale of them. But the critical thing about these endeavours is that they will assist in cementing down arrangements that make the relationships between these big economies and smaller economies more and more reliable. And there's no evidence that China has approached these negotiations in a way that will not yield on critical issues of importance to Indonesia, its partners in ASEAN, to Australia, and to other countries in the process, and extend those concessions to other countries over time. There's no evidence that that is the case. So the threat of the big in this will be ameliorated by success with the effort. And we all have to put the effort into articulating that outcome and that reality to our political constituencies. So there are many answers to the question about what you would do to persuade political constituencies that this is the way to go. But they're among the powerful ones. We have a threat, an existential threat in the uncertainties in the global economic system. We have a powerful need in terms of realising the potential for growth in an economy like Indonesia's or India's, or for that matter, the next phase of it in China, to make progress with this reform agenda. And we have a powerful interest to do it in a context which strengthens the rules upon which we engage with not only these partners, but also in the international economy.
One more point, and that is, of course, the example has been given, by Japan and the EU. If they come to an agreement in the next week or so, or this week, to have that trade agreement established, that is definitely one part of the whole system that we have to pursue in the future.
Yes, I think I can add to that question. I was just about to ask the question about bilateral agreements, because that seems to be the way Indonesia is going, and certainly the US has also indicated that that's the way they're going. How do we deal or manage with this increased bilateralism? And again, will the Asian type of bilateralism be able to be open regionalism? Question mark. And I think the second question I would like to ask is, how to sell this openness argument. I would agree with you. If you like, exaggerate even the crisis. So as a former policymaker, the best way to get things moving is just to scare the hell out of everybody. So if we don't do this, this is really going to happen. But I think that will work to some extent. But I think the other component of this rising protectionism, anti-globalization, is of course the perception, rightly or wrongly, about the gains from trade. So I think we also need to have the story for the politicians as to how we deal with the so-called unequal distribution. And of course every country will have a different issue regarding this. So I was just wondering whether in the thinking that you've gone through, the other part of the selling is how do we give these politicians who have a very short sight hand the ability to fight for openness, but then they also have to be giving out the balance. How do we manage that? And I think it's different now. It's more difficult, obviously. And I don't think like bad times lead to good policies will not work as it did before without that balance. So those are my two additional questions.
I just take the last point first and say yes. Certainly, you've got to grab the moment. You've got to grab the moment more now than perhaps you used to in the past. More stability in political systems, for better or for worse. But there is a moment in which these issues can be grabbed. This isn't a thing that has to be invented from scratch. It's out there. It's waiting to happen. And the next 18 months to 2 years is a time in which the opportunity can be grabbed. So this is a strategic time to take an initiative of the kind we're talking about. And we've spent years and years structuring a circumstance upon which it can be taken. So I would emphasize that the opportunity is now. Now, you say that you couldn't manufacture. Well, I'm scared. I'm genuinely scared about these circumstances. And I'm scared for the reasons you raised in the first part of your comment, Marty. Bilateralism in this circumstance is not benign bilateralism. We live in what is defined by the President of the United States, among other things, in an intensely transactional world. So that means the big and the powerful have incentive to protect themselves against each other by doing deals between each other which will be seriously damaging to others in the system. The China-US thing is the most problematic. If you think about how she walked away from the Florida summit with a sense of huge relief that for the moment the figure was in the dark and something was offered which didn't compromise the system too much in terms of yielding more openness to the Chinese markets, promising more openness, but actually not disturbing the system. Except, for trades like gas trade. That was a system changer because what was promised there was special deals for US suppliers into the Chinese market against the principles of an open global gas trade, for example. This sort of deal is going to happen more and more in this kind of world. So bilateralism can be benign and not a problem in an era in which the system around it protects against its unfortunate consequences, the discrimination that's involved in it, potentially. When the global system is robust and when the opportunities for discrimination in trade and dealings are limited, then that's a circumstance in which, of course, you've got to do things bilaterally. If we had a robust competition in the Chinese gas market, I remember between Indonesia and Australia in the early days of the Chinese gas market, we were involved in that. but it was dealt with in an open competitive basis, not in the framework of a special deal for Australia or a special deal for Indonesia to exclude competition. But that's the world to which we are now moving. And we have to avoid that like the plague, because it destroys the whole system. Now, for the moment, China is standing against that to an important extent, and its commitments of policy, at least in rhetoric, are strong on that. But in the final analysis, when China has to settle with the United States that wants to do a bilateral deal that discriminates against the rest of the world, well, certainly I'm not confident that they will be so scared.
Agree on that. If you just look at the pattern, since probably China led the way in the way, okay, how do we deal with the US today question? You can see every country that's dealt with the US recently in all the bilaterals, they always come with the deal first. We're going to buy so much defense equipment, we're going to buy this and that. That's part of the deal. And the focus is on deficit, still, from the US perspective. So I think this is really quite, I'm with you, I'm quite scared.
Can I just add one other thing, which I think you raised another question there that I didn't deal with, which I think is really important. In being persuasive politically, you've got to master the facts. You've got to master the facts about what the consequences of taking one policy course rather than another policy course are. So it is important to do these exercises like we've been doing to persuade Australians that in the worst case scenario, if President Trump did all he promised to do, or if he did half what he promised to do, or if he did a quarter of what he promised to do, it's still in our best interest to pursue liberalisation by ourselves, but preferably in coalition with you. Yeah. So, and it's sensible to do the numbers on that. And you can say how much it costs Indonesia to take another course. And they fall, you don't have to do them new, they all fall out of the numbers we're doing. You can take those numbers and look at them.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Anybody else would like to ask any questions? Jose?
Since I was asked to ask questions, or then make a comment perhaps. I just actually checked my email, and then I received the what you call this? I received an email from Global Trade Alliance. Then it just published annual what you call these publications, annual reports on the global trade protectionisms. And one of the things that this report mentioned is that what the U.S. has promised to do, or what Mr. President Trump has promised to do, actually in practice he already did. He has already done several things because some protectionism measures are actually already there, and then that's the kind of things also as what you already discussed will pose a threat to our globalization and our multilateralisms, and then I think I also agree with Peter that ASEAN and also Indonesia need to do something, and also perhaps even to lead the process in providing the multilateralisms and operationalisms. But when we're looking at the Indonesia and other countries in ASEAN, what actually can we sell? What actually can we offer to the world as the basis for us to propose for greater multilateralism, or to go back to the multilateralism and to avoid bilateralism. And many ASEAN countries, including Indonesia, as Mario also mentioned, already prepared actually for the bilateralism. And what we should do then, these countries should declare. Indonesia will become one of the member of the G20, and the G20 summit would be held this weekend. And then I think this also that's also a good opportunity for Indonesia to declare something. But I don't think Indonesia will take a stronger position to support for multilateralism. I think that's my comments, and also perhaps questions to Peter and also to you, perhaps.
Let me add one more question, and this will be the last question for you to answer. I think the other part that I always worry about is that, you talk about openness and need to do unilateral reform and liberalization. I think we have come to the area of reform which is also more difficult, right? The easy part was reducing tariffs and some of the cross-border barriers. But then when you go behind the border, like standards, like issues of domestic regulations, these are really actually the harder areas. Not to mention, to connect to this first session on technology, a lot of the new agreements, as you saw in TPP, is no longer just about free movement of goods, services, and people, but also data. And that's like a whole new area in the trade agreements that are also, I think, complicating how we see reforms ahead. So maybe just if you could comment on that.
Just on your question first, I think what you said is true, and it underlines the importance of the cooperation dimension of the agenda for reform and liberalisation of that kind. It's not, these things are hard to do, but let's not kid ourselves. People have done them before. So there are paths forward that are more difficult and less difficult, and that we can learn from. And so sharing that experience, I think, is a really important way to make progress on those difficult areas. And that's why I think the ASEAN way offers a much better path forward on those issues than the negotiation of those standards from some strong power and the imposition of those standards through a legal supranational arrangement that emanates from some strong power. So I think that's what ASEAN has going forward in that way. You're right about the impact of these uncertainties already having its way, a point that I shared with you earlier on trade and economic potential. We're in the early phases of recovery now, but that's going to be clipped short and much weaker with these uncertainties, and if some of the measures come into play that are promised. And we're not through the worst of it. Don't kid ourselves that we're through the worst of it. Things are likely more than not to get worse, not better. We can sit back in Australia and think, well, if Trump does this to the steel trade, or if Trump does this to American imports, the biggest cost will be on North America. Mexico, most dramatically, sort of 20%, 26% fall in income. One fell swoop. And China, and it'll affect us very little in the first round of effects, but in the second round of effects, of course, it affects more and more orders, more and more the bystanders. So this is an issue that is still unfolding, and it's one that I think is urgent to address. Now, what can Indonesia, or for that matter Australia, or other countries do about it. It's a multifaceted strategy with 2 or 3 key elements. One element you mentioned is Indonesia's participation in the G20 is helpful. It doesn't have to actually stand up and lead the way there, but if it stands with a coalition against protectionism, and it's going to be hard this weekend to do that because there'll be members of the G20 who want to against any side costs from the United States in particular. It will be important to do that because it will lay down a marker that will signal those political, if not economic damage to proceeding on a course that is dangerous to Indonesia's our collective interests. So I think we all have to stand up and do that in the G20 press. I don't know if we've got the bravery or the courage to do that. Frankly, we'll see this coming week. There's a lot of uncertainty about it. Whether the 19 are going to be firm against the 1 is a question mark. Certainly Merkel wants to leave. It won't be easy. And somebody's going to have to eat humble pie at the end of this. So that's important. And if we're not brave this time round, we certainly need to be brave the next time round and the next time round. So we need to be brave in representing these interests in global fora to which we have access, and Indonesia is a big player now. So it's got access. Secondly, we do need to articulate the national interest in these things, what it would do to the opportunities for growth in Indonesia and in our region, in ASEAN and more generally in our region, if there's backward sliding on this stuff. So we have to take up the challenge that Pons and Yose announced of persuading the political constituency. We've got a problem here. We've got a problem here. We have to deal with this problem in this way. And we have to be more active in particular. This is where, I see a great yawning chasm in Australia without a political head at this stage. Have to be more active in our diplomacy with coalitions of partners who will have the same interests at stake. And that's important in our region. So we have to talk among ourselves about what is at stake in this thing. And then, as I said before, actions will speak louder than words in all of this. And the opportunity for action is on the platform that's in place to move forward on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership negotiation, and to see that as an important economic but also political strategic interest.
Thank you. Got a one-hander? Oh. Okay, Pons, and then maybe the lady here first. Is that Didi? Yeah, Didi. Sorry, you don't have my glasses.
No problem. We were discussing your presentation and comments from all the audience quietly there, because we are quite pessimistic with, of course, this idea is good, but why we are pessimistic? Because of the issues that Pons raised, especially if we talk about Indonesia. Do we have the national interest to go forward with this idea? We have the cost of doing it because we are going to have election soon. Will this going to affect negatively the vote that the current government is having? At the ASEAN level, as Pons mentioned, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand are the problem of moving forward. If you see the RCEP, it's not going forward as fast as we have expected or want. It's just like stalled somewhere. So if you are going to, the process is going to be long, although, and it's not as the picture and the effect on Indonesia is not as scary as
Ibu Mari has described. So with that scareness or the negative impact needs to be really put forward that this is a scary situation. At this level, I don't think that that picture that is scary as we try to picture. And in the past, our experience with opening up forgot one important aspect actually. The adjustment to the losing sectors or people of the society was not addressed properly. I think that's going to contribute to the difficulty to move forward with openness.
That's going to have to be the last question. Sorry, because we have run out of time, so we'll end on that question.
Certainly, the first step is to acknowledge the problem and to ask seriously and politically in terms of engaging with political constituency about what the potential solutions are to the problem. If I have persuaded you that there's a problem, I will leave happy. And I will be optimistic, not pessimistic. And then I'll watch you deal with the problem. But in Indonesia, I would have thought, especially in the next 2 years, it wouldn't be unhelpful for a political leader to be able to say that we've moved towards negotiating and concluding an arrangement that offers a greater measure of economic and political security in the community. And this is a time frame within which it can be done. So I know there are problems, but the first thing is to acknowledge the problem and acknowledge that failure to do something is a policy choice too. And that policy choice affects outcomes in the same way as choosing to act in some strategic fashion.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for, I think, a stimulating discussion. I think I can sort of see Hadi amongst us today, being part of the debate. I think this, as you said, we first have to acknowledge the problem and the cost of not doing anything, and the threat. And actually, Pak Yusuf and yourself have given us homework. We are supposed to write some words to convince people of the importance of this issue. And you also, and you made a very good point, and I think this is homework for us, CSIS, for Titi, and for Rizky, PhD student over there, to really put facts and figures to analyze the different scenarios, including the cost if you did nothing. And this is the onus upon us. But I would say that, you know, at the moment, besides the pessimism against globalization, there's also kind of an anti-establishment, anti-intellectual fight back, right? So we also have to be clever enough to scare the hell out of people, but also give them solution, right? That, you know, the adjustment policies that will be also accompanying the openness needs to be real and concrete also. So I think that's kind of, I think, the policy answer for Indonesia, to make it politically acceptable in a package, if we can put it that way. And I think that's really very urgent homework for all of us, which I think Peter has stimulated this discussion for us. And we shouldn't be pessimistic, because if we just say, oh, this is too hard, and we don't do anything, then we are also at fault, right? So I will end on that note that we have a lot of homework being given to us, and I think Hadi will also be very happy that we've been given all this homework, because it requires not just the usual economic analysis, facts and figures. It requires us to think strategically as to how we can sell this nationally and build this collective leadership regionally. And in RCEP, I know it's a lot of challenges. Nobody asked this question about India, but India is actually one of the big issues out there besides Indonesia. So I think this is really still challenging times for us, but let's not be pessimistic. Let's be optimistic and do something about it.